Welcome to our fourth episode here on the Darling and Darling podcast. I'm Tim and this is Simi, and today we are going to talk about creative writing. So last week it was about journaling, and we want to stay with the writing topic but go into the creative realm this week. And first we want to talk about how did we even get into writing and how did we start that, why do we like it. So Simi, do you want to tell us about that?
I started writing really young. I always liked stories and I always liked also reading. So it was no wonder that I started to write my own stories at some point. And then I also, like a couple of years ago, I started to have friend groups with whom I played D&D or pen and paper. Well, actually we only do like homebrew stuff, but that's besides the point. And I was the gaming master for these games, so I also started to write storylines and stuff for them, and so I just grew into writing stories.
I think I somehow started when I was in school, even though back then I always thought those story writing, that's just boring homework and what you might do in school, and I didn't really like it. But I started with like making small comics, like from one of my teachers, for example. I made some fun little stories. So I think there was the groundwork for becoming, if you want to call it a storyteller. And then when you got me to playing D&D, that's when I started actually writing stories, when I was working on the backstory for my character. So that's when I really started. And that's also when I realized just how much fun it is to write it down and to get creative, to develop characters, to develop stories, to also like get your own story, get your own history, your own values into that. That's when I started to really appreciate that, I think.
That's actually really cool.
Yeah, thank you. So let's talk about how we are doing that. So feel free to start if you want to, and just tell us, how do you write? How do you do that?
First, I think the first thing one has to do if they want to start writing is to think about for what do you want to write it. Like, do you want to just write a fun little story? Do you want to write it for D&D? Do you want to make a book out of it? Or do you want to do it for a competition, for example? So I think it's really important to figure out for what you are doing it, because then you also figure out which stuff has to be in there. Do you know what I mean with that?
Yes, I do know what you mean. I think you mean, for example, like how big does it have to be? How many characters can you put in? For example, like I imagine what you mean is if you just want to write a short story, you don't need 20 characters. But if you want to write a novel, then it probably won't work if you have only 3 characters. I think that's what you want to tell us, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's also really important because, for example, when I had one campaign going on and I had a really cool storyline for that, and then the campaign didn't continue because, some of the characters just, like the players didn't want to play anymore, and so we stopped that. And that's actually what my now then hopefully at some point a novel is going to be about the campaign, and about the storyline I had planned for the campaign. campaign. So when I did it for the campaign, it was much more open. It were some story beats and an overall theme for the campaign, but I left enough open for each character to find out their own stuff in that story. So I didn't have to write that. That was not my goal there, and also not my purpose to do that. And since I started to put that into my own work and to put it into a novel, I started to fill all of those gaps because I have to write them ultimately, because I don't have different players giving me the input. The input is coming from myself. So I think it's really important to also have that in mind. What is your goal with it?
I think that's a really cool advice. I would add to that, because first from my personal experience and also from that little story you just told us, don't decide that before you start writing. Because I will explain what I mean. I think the best approach is, or what worked best in my experience, is start writing, and then when you get a feeling for the story, because when I started writing my backstory, my first real story, then the story somehow developed its own life, I would say. Because it's not like I as an author then decide that's what I want to do and that's how I write it, but it's more like the story develops, and then there's just an opportunity where I want to write more about, and then there's a new twist just developing that I hadn't planned for. So I think it's really good to have in mind what you are writing for, but be open to change that. I also worked then on another story that I wanted to submit for a competition, and when I was finished with that, or with the first draft, let's say, then I realized I find it way too short, because you have to have a specific length for that competition, and I had that length, but I realized there's so much open here and there's so much more I could explore, so I decided to not submit it for that competition, because I felt like I want to make it bigger, and it would have ended up too big for that competition, but I wanted to reach more of its potential and not leave it at that short size. So what I've learned there is, have in mind what you're writing for, but leave it open for change, because your story will develop, and it's quite likely that it will develop differently than what you have expected, and then you might also change the goal that you want to reach with it, or the audience you want to reach, for example.
Yeah, that's actually true. There are so many tips and tricks out there, also authors who do it differently. Like some of the authors plot everything out and then write it down, and some of them just start with a general idea or prompt and then go from there and figure it out. And I made the experience, it's really cool to make a mixture. I think it's really important to know the characters that are in that world or in that scenario. So especially if you write something like a fantasy novel or sci-fi or something like that, you have to have a general idea of the world you are in or the characters are in. So to plot that out, or to have ideas for that and to think about that, that's really, really helpful, because then you can just write and it feels like you are part of that world. So you write in it. It's not like you have to figure it out as you go, and then every second sentence you're like, wait, how does weather work here? Wait, how is day and night cycles going on? Do I have months or do I have something else here? So I think it's important to, especially in the fantasy realm, just have some general idea and then go from there.
Yeah, I think that's a really cool advice. And from our stories about the D&D campaign, I remember that we extensively invested time into this world building, and the fun part about it was that I was really excited about dropping things about the world in my story. So having all that knowledge and everything, or not everything, but quite a lot mapped out about the world, made it even more exciting to write about it. Because I knew, or when I write about the weather, for example, I can put in that idea that we thought about. Or when I write that it's getting night, I can put in how we imagined dawn and dusk, for example, in that world. So it made it even more fun to write all about it. And I think it also makes it way easier to visualize that for yourself. And once you have visualized it, it's way easier to put it down on the paper. And then that's where the fun starts, I would say.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, if you have ideas and you have, yeah, as you said, a visualization, I think that's the word, then it's so much easier. You don't struggle with that so much. And also with like characters, if you have a general idea what your character likes and what it doesn't like, and where they want to go or where they come from, it's so much easier also to make writing more organic and to let the characters do their work. Because at some point, I heard that so often, I'm yet to experience that myself, that you write and at some point they just do something and it's going to be a really organic way of developing the story, because at some point it just, as you already said, has their own life. And I think it's so much easier to get to that point when you already know the characters and know what they would do or how they think about stuff. So I think thinking and plotting out the characters is also not a bad idea in general.
Yeah, I think so too. And even if you don't map them out in the beginning, in my experience, you will get a feeling for them while you write, because you will write them in a certain way, and then you will just get that feeling for them. What I also want to try out, I haven't really tried it out yet, but I want to do it in the future, that I assign certain personality types to the characters. Because I really like psychology, and I'm also learning more about personality types. And I think that's just an interesting layer to put upon your characters, to give them specific personality types. And then in the situations your characters are in, ask yourself, how would that personality type react to it? I think more often than not, you do that subconsciously, because many characters, for me personally, I have a real person in mind that resembles that character, and then that character automatically also mirrors that person's personality. So somehow it's also a real personality type then, but I haven't consciously assigned a personality to a fictional character of me yet.
But it's a really, really interesting idea that you have there. And to do it consciously, I think that also gives more, like, it ultimately informs more about the character and how they react to stuff. So I think it's really cool.
I think it also gives you some guidance to make your characters consistent, because when you have that personality type as orientation, then they will just be consistent in their acting and how they react to situations. And so it might also be then easier to read, because then it won't be surprising how a character reacts, and it will fit into a certain pattern. And I think that might also be satisfying for the reader at the end.
That's That's really, really cool actually, because it's all about consistency and making the characters and the world consistent. So it's a really cool way to achieve that. So we already heard a little about how my story or novel is going to be about. How about your novel? What it, what is it going to be about?
So I'm working on several different projects right now, even though working is a bit of an overstatement. So I have several projects lying around, let's put it that way.
Maybe they're also marinating in your brain.
Yes, definitely. And one of them is definitely still my first story, that first backstory I wrote. Then I have that current backstory, because we started a new campaign with a new character, obviously. And I'm also writing a backstory for that character. And then I have an independent project. And I started that one due to that competition. It's called the Young Storyteller Award. Just put that in your browser, Google it, and just read it. If you want to learn more about it, you will find the website there and you will find the information. So check it out. It's really interesting. And I started a new project there that is set in a different world and has nothing to do with the D&D campaign. And that's a bit of a futuristic sci-fi that somehow plays in our world, but somehow doesn't, because there are like different species and not only humans are there. So I find that really interesting and I really enjoy that. And I just wanted to find an independent project where I can try it out, where I can publish something, and it doesn't really matter if it's a success or not, because then if it's not successful, then I can just leave that project be and focus on other stories again. What I really want to add here with the different projects, at first I thought, like, if you write many stories, you might get into a routine of writing stories. And I found out that that's actually not the case, because it feels like every story I start writing at some point develops its own life. And then every story is different. And it's different how you interact with that story. With one story, for example, with that first backstory, I also put in, like, I really related with that main character. And I wanted to give him some of my values and some of my hobbies, some of my experiences. And I really saw myself within that character. So there was a really interesting side of writing. Then with that second backstory I'm writing, I was experimenting a bit with AI. So for example, with ChatGPT, I wrote him some ideas and looked if he can put together a story, and got inspiration for a few, like for technology, for example, in that world. And I had never tried that before. So that was really interesting and gave a new perspective on writing that story, and a new process on how to write. And that third story is also like completely different characters, different worlds, and then you also can differently relate to all these characters. And for me, it's not the case that the more you write, the more routine you get for it, for example. But every story is like a new beginning, and it's something completely new, and it's a new adventure, and it will just be something new and something like each story is something special, feels like to me. So that was something I didn't expect, but I really enjoy about all these different projects I'm working on.
What I want to add to that, it's true that you never get into a routine. Like, it never gets boring when you write new projects or do new projects, but I think it gets easier. The more often you do it, it gets easier. At which point you have to take a step back and go back to, for example, plotting something for the world, or at which point you can just let it go its own way because you know already, okay, that's going to be fine and all right. Stuff like that. I think that comes with experience. And also writer's block. I don't think that happens that often when you do the more and more projects you do, because you also learn, like it's like a muscle. Writing is a bit like a muscle. You just have to train it so the creativity also can flow freely. So I think that also comes with doing multiple stuff like after each other or sometimes simultaneously, that you get a feeling for writing and also for writing without judging. Especially with the first draft, it's really important to just write it all down and don't judge and don't edit and don't do anything with it. Just write it so it's down. And I think that just is much easier when you do it for the like 5th or 6th or 7th time.
Yes, I want to add a few thoughts to that. First one, we talked earlier about that visualization process. And what I feel like is for each story, the way you get to that visualization is completely different. But the process of getting that visualization on paper, that gets easier with every time. So let's say that creative part, that interesting fun part, that's always different and it's always something new. But that, let's say, the working part where you have to put it down, that will get more and more easy because you will have to practice, you will have, like, your vocabulary will expand, and then it will get easier to put it down. But to reach that image of your story, of your world, of your characters, that's always fresh and new for each story and for each character that you get into a story. So I think we can wrap it up here. We've already talked a few minutes here and it was really general. I really want to get back to this creative writing topic, maybe with some specific questions that we then want to answer. And let's get to our key takeaways that we want to pass on.
Yeah, I want to say too that we want to go back to the thing. I think also with like different steps of our own process, it's really interesting to look at that point of view in that time frame. Like when we have our first drafts finished, that we can then just be like, okay, that's our takeaways from doing it for the first time. I think that also would be really cool.
Yes, definitely. We will definitely, when we reach some milestones, then we will get back to that. Maybe at some point in the future, also about finding a publisher or self-publishing, but that's way ahead in the future right now.
So yeah, some of our key takeaways are that we want to make it clear to you guys that every person can do what we are doing, and if you just like to write some short stories or something, you can just do it. Nobody has to be a born author to write stories, and every person also has something to tell or has something to share with the world, and everybody has a story that it's worth sharing with the world. So that we wanted to make really clear that it's not only us who can do that, it's everybody who can do that.
Yes, and we also want to encourage you, if you have the feeling that there is something within you that wants to get out, then just start writing. And I want to circle back to what we talked about in the beginning, that you have in mind what you are writing for. And I want to encourage you to have that in mind, but don't let it pressure you. For example, if you want to publish it and if you want to be an author and if you want to create a best-selling book, then don't let that pressure you into creating the perfect book and that you, with every line, you think about, will that have the spirit to be a bestseller? Don't think about that in those early stages. Just be yourself, be creative, write what you feel like you should be writing in that moment. And then maybe at the end it will turn out to be a bestseller. But in my experience, if you force it, then you will destroy it. So be yourself, be authentic, write what feels to urge you to get out. And then you will see where it will lead you and what you will do. For the end, we again have a writing prompt for you. And this time it's not about journaling, it's not about self-help, but we want to stay in that creative process. So we have a creative writing prompt for you, and we encourage you to just try it out, even if you have never tried it before. Maybe you find it a bit silly, maybe like I experienced it when I was in school. Maybe it will remind you of some stupid homework that you had to do in school. Don't let that bias you. Just try it out, be creative, be yourself, and as I said, everything that you feel like writing, just write it down, and I think then it will be great. And our writing prompt is to write a fictional story, and we have 3 keywords for you that we want you to incorporate into that story, and those 3 words are podcast, beach, and stranger. So I think that will be really interesting what kind of stories can turn out from this prompt. And as always, you can reach out to us on our website, darling-and-darling.com. And maybe you want to share your story with us once you've written it. We would really appreciate it. You can send it to us. And yeah, check out our blog on our website. Check out different podcast episodes. And we will see you in the next one.
Until then, bye bye.
Bye bye.